A soldier can train himself to ignore pain, noise, even fear. But there's one thing he never quite learns to shut out: silence. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and leaves you alone with whatever's rattling around in your head. On the far edge of the Louisiana Gulf Coast, in a dying shrimp town called Bay Marais, Ethan Cole had been living inside that kind of silence for almost a year. The town used to be louder. Years back, the docks were crowded with boats and men shouting over the slap of waves and the whine of winches. Now, most of the trawlers sat half-sunk in brown water, their names, Miss Lila, Faith Ann, Lucky Star, peeling off in sun-faded paint. Ethan's stilt house stood at the far end of a warped boardwalk, where the marsh began to swallow the land. The gulf stretched beyond that, flat, gray-green, and endless. When the wind was right, the smell of diesel and dead shrimp rolled in with the tide. He had chosen the place because no one bothered to come this far down anymore, just him and the dog. Rex padded along the porch at his side, nails clicking softly against old cypress planks. The German shepherd moved with the once precise rhythm of a trained working dog, but there were details the casual eye might miss. A faint white line under one eye where shrapnel had grazed him. A slight favoring of his right rear leg when the humidity changed. They were both a little banged up by the years. Ethan rested his forearms on the railing and watched the sky darken over the gulf. Thick clouds were building out there, stacked like bruises along the horizon. The weather radio on his kitchen counter had been repeating the same message for hours. Tropical storm Nadine is expected to strengthen as it moves toward the Louisiana coast. He barely listened. Storms came and went. He'd seen worse, in the Middle East, in the Hindu Kush. Storms of a different sort that didn't get named on the Weather Channel. He was retired now. That was the polite word. The less polite version involved the phrase congressional inquiry and the words miscalculated strike. The night that had ended his career was burned into his brain. A village on the edge of nowhere, bad intel, a call for air support that should have saved his team and a group of local allies. Instead, the coordinates had been off by less than 100 yards, close enough to turn a house full of families into a crater, far enough that the men who'd sold them the intel walked away untouched. They'd needed someone to blame. The man on the radio was the easiest target. Now, here he was, ex-Navy SEAL Ethan Cole, former team leader, poster boy for acceptable sacrifice, hiding out at the end of the world, pretending the sea could wash his hands clean. Rex nudged his elbow with a cold nose. Ethan glanced down. The dog's ears were pricked, eyes fixed not on the storm offshore, but on the narrow gravel road that wound through the marsh and ended at the house. "What is it, buddy?" Ethan murmured. Rex didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just stared, muscles coiled, every sense locked onto some signal Ethan couldn't yet see or hear. Old instincts slid into place inside the man as easily as a knife into a sheath. Ethan straightened, scanning the distance. The late afternoon light was dimming, turning the marsh grass into a restless black fringe. Nothing moved on the road, at first. Then he heard it, a faint, irregular hum. Motor struggling, tires sliding where they shouldn't. The sound grew louder, then suddenly cut off with a crunch that made every muscle in his body tighten. Ethan squinted. Through the gray drizzle he saw a flash of white. A pickup, maybe, veering where the road dipped close to the narrow canal. Then the sound of breaking wood, splintering guardrail, the sudden harsh splash of something heavy leaving the road and slamming into shallow water. The noise rolled across the marsh, then vanished. Silence rushed in after it. Rex was already moving before Ethan did. The dog vaulted off the porch with a fluid power that belied his scars and landed in the wet grass, sprinting toward the road. He didn't look back to see if Ethan was coming. He knew he would. "Rex, heel!" Ethan shouted automatically, instincts flaring. The shepherd ignored the command. That told Ethan everything he needed to know. He grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door and the Glock from the table beside it. The pistol was loaded. It was always loaded. Old habits died hard, if they ever died at all. By the time he hit the end of the boardwalk, Rex was a dark streak against the pale road, already at the point where the guardrail had been shattered. Ethan's boots slid in wet gravel as he closed the distance. The canal was narrow, more like a deep ditch choked with reeds and black water. The pickup had slammed nose first through the mud bank and lay at an ugly angle, rear wheels still on the embankment, front end submerged. Steam hissed from the twisted hood. One headlight flickered weakly underwater like a drowning eye. Rex stood on the bank, barking now, sharp and insistent, teeth bared, not in threat, but in alarm. He stabbed his nose toward the cab. Ethan's gaze followed. Through the cracked windshield, he saw movement. The driver's seat was crushed up against the steering wheel. Behind it, half curled against the back window, a girl maybe 13, 14 at most, struggled weakly against a seatbelt twisted around her chest. Her eyes met his through the spiderweb of broken glass. They were the pale gray of a winter sky, and they were full of wild, lucid terror. Ethan didn't hesitate. He holstered the weapon, hit the mud bank in 2 strides, and slid down into the cold, stinking water. The canal tried to suck him in. He forced his way to the driver's side, feet searching for purchase in muck. The driver was beyond help. One look at the way his neck bent told Ethan that. He shoved down the familiar compartment in his brain where that kind of detail lived, focused on the living. "Hang on!" he yelled, voice muffled by the closed window. "I've got you!" Her mouth moved. He couldn't hear her words, but he didn't need to. He braced one foot on the truck's rear wheel and drove an elbow into the window, then a second, putting his shoulder behind it. Old strength, maintained through discipline and habit, surged through him. The glass went with a sharp crack and gave way in a spray of shards. Water poured in. He ducked his head to avoid the worst of the glass and reached for the girl, his fingers working swiftly at the belt. It was jammed, the buckle bent from the impact. He yanked a folding knife from his pocket and sliced through the strap in 2 rough sawing motions. The truck shifted beneath them, sinking deeper. He hooked one arm around her shoulders and pulled her toward him, feeling the tremble of her limbs, the hitch of panicked breaths. As he dragged her through the window, something thumped against his chest, something strapped beneath her jacket. A small metal box, hard and cold, the size of a paperback. Not the time to ask questions. He hauled her out, turned, and lunged for the bank, half lifting, half shoving her ahead of him. Rex braced at the top, paws digging into mud, teeth clamping onto the girl's jacket and helping haul her up. Between them, man and dog dragged her onto relatively solid ground, just as the truck's cab filled with water. The vehicle slid forward with a sucking groan and disappeared nose first into the black canal. For a few seconds, the only sounds were the patter of rain, the hiss of settling mud, and the girl's ragged gasps. Ethan dropped to one knee beside her, quickly scanning for injuries. "Can you move your fingers?" he asked, voice calm, even, the same tone he'd used in blown-out doorways and bullet-scarred alleys. "Your toes?" She blinked water from her eyes and obeyed, her movements jerky but responsive. Yeah, she stammered, accent local, Gulf Coast drawl tightened by fear. "Hurts like crazy, but I think so." "Good. You're banged up, but you're here. That's what matters." Her gaze flicked to Rex, who stood guard over them, hackles still raised as he swept the marsh with his eyes. "You have a dog," she whispered. Ethan almost smiled. "Yeah, that's Rex." The girl looked from the German shepherd to Ethan's face. Something in her expression changed. Fear was still there, but it sharpened into something else. Recognition. "You're him," she said, breath catching. "You're Ethan Cole." Every muscle in his back went rigid. The last time anyone had said his full name with that kind of intensity had been in a congressional hearing room filled with cameras. He studied her, suddenly aware of how exposed they all were at the side of this lonely road, with a wreck in the canal and a storm marching in from. Oh, the Gulf. "Who told you my name?" he asked quietly. She swallowed. Her fingers closed around the metal box against her chest as if it were a lifeline. "My uncle," she said. "He said, if anything went wrong, I had to get this to you." The world seemed to tilt under Ethan's boots in a very particular way. He had heard those words before, in other places, spoken by men bleeding out on sand and concrete. Get this. To them. Get this. To command. Get this. To someone who can actually do something. "Who's your uncle?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer, like a storm that had been building on a horizon he'd refused to look at. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "His name was Noah Briggs," she whispered. "He said you were the only one left he trusted." The name hit Ethan like a blow. Noah Briggs, team sniper, smart mouth. Steadier hands than anyone Ethan had ever met behind a scope. The man who'd been on the rooftop that night in the village, eyes on target, covering their approach. Noah had died in the blast. Ethan had seen his body. Hadn't he? Lightning flickered far out over the gulf. Thunder followed along the horizon a few seconds later, low and distant. Rex pressed closer to Ethan's side, sensing the tension climbing in his handler's body. "How long ago did you leave wherever you were coming from?" Ethan asked, voice tightening. "Is anyone else alive?" She shook her head, biting her lip. "We left this morning," she said, "from the locks outside Point La Roche. Uncle Noah said we'd beat the storm if the engine held, but then this truck started overheating and—" Her voice broke. "We saw a black SUV in the rear view. It followed us from town. He made me take the box and shove it under my jacket. He said, if they caught us, I was to run. Find you." She looked toward the canal, where muddy water swallowed the last of the truck's bubbles. "Then we hit the slick. He didn't even have time to hit the brakes." Ethan listened, every nerve wired. A black SUV, following, a they. A message from a dead man. Supposedly dead. He rose, scanning the road in both directions. The marsh lay in flat, deceptive calm, but the little hairs on his arms prickled the way they always did when a target was out there, just beyond sight. "Come on," he said, decision snapping into place. "We're not staying out here." He offered the girl a hand. She took it, wincing, and let him pull her to her feet. Her jeans were soaked and torn at the knee. Blood seeped through, but the leg took weight. Bruised ribs, maybe. Nothing obviously broken. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lila," she said. "Lila Briggs." He nodded once. "Okay, Lila Briggs, you're coming with us." Rex took point on the narrow road, moving with deliberate purpose now, nose cutting the damp air, every muscle alive. Ethan kept the girl on his left, his own senses flaring outward. They were halfway back to the house when Rex stopped dead so abruptly that Ethan nearly walked into him. The shepherd's head lifted, his ears pinned forward, body going still in that eerie, statue-like way only a trained dog could manage. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "What now?" Lila whispered, eyes wide. Ethan's answer was a soft, deadly practical motion. He drew the Glock and lowered his center of gravity, eyes scanning the marsh. The sound came to him a second later. An engine. Smooth this time, controlled, moving slow. From around a bend in the road, a sleek black SUV rolled into view, tires whispering over wet gravel. Its windows were tinted dark enough to reflect only storm-thick sky. No plates on the front bumper. Lila sucked in a sharp breath. "That's them," she hissed. The SUV slowed when the driver saw the broken guardrail and the missing pickup. The nose dipped toward the gap. The engine idled. Ethan did a quick calculation. Distance, cover, options. There weren't many. "House!" he snapped. "Move! Now!" He didn't wait to see if she obeyed. His tone made sure of it. He backed toward the stilt house, keeping himself between Lila and the vehicle, Rex shifting in tandem with him, a living, breathing piece of cover. The SUV crept forward, coming to a stop beside the broken railing. The passenger door opened with slow, unhurried deliberation. A man stepped out. He wore a clean white shirt, sleeves rolled up despite the gathering storm, and dark slacks too fine for Bay Marais. No tie, no badge. On his wrist, a heavy watch gleamed. He took in the shattered rail, the canal, the absence of the pickup, and finally the retreating trio, man, dog, and soaked teenager, with a single practice sweep of cold blue eyes. Then he smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Mr. Cole," he called, voice carrying easily across the space. "What an unexpected pleasure." Ethan's finger tightened on the Glock, but he didn't raise it. Not yet. "Afraid you've got the wrong guy," he said. The man chuckled, genuinely amused. "Please, I've seen your face in more than one hearing transcript." He spread his hands just enough to show they were empty. "Name's Carter Voss. I work for Gulf Meridian Logistics." Gulf Meridian. The name slid into Ethan's brain and landed with a weight disproportionate to the syllables. He'd seen it stamped on containers down at the port, on the side of trucks that rumbled through town at night. He'd also seen it in an after-action report years ago, in a footnote about a local contracting partner. Beside him, Lila whispered, "That's the company. Uncle Noah said they were at the center of it all." Voss heard her. His smile thinned. "Miss Briggs," he said, eyes sharpening. "Glad to see you survived the little driving mishap. Unfortunate about your uncle. Truly." There was no grief in his tone, only a vague annoyance, like someone commenting on a broken tool. Ethan stepped slightly in front of Lila. "You followed them," he said. Voss shrugged one shoulder. "We were concerned," he said smoothly. "Mr. Briggs took something that doesn't belong to him. We were in the process of retrieving company property when he chose to flee." His gaze slid to the metal box under Lila's jacket, as if he could see straight through fabric and skin. "And now, I imagine that property has changed hands." Rex's growl deepened, teeth flashing white beneath rain-dark lips. Voss's eyes touched on the shepherd, measuring. "Hands up," Ethan said, voice gone flat. "Turn around, get back in the vehicle, drive away. You don't come back here." Voss smiled genuinely now, the expression almost warm. It made Ethan's skin crawl. "Mr. Cole," he said gently, "I'm not the kind of man you get to intimidate anymore. Those days are behind you. These days, I don't go anywhere without a contingency." He lifted two fingers from his side like a conductor flicking a baton. From the back of the SUV, two doors opened in perfect unison. Two men stepped out, moving with a fluid economy that Ethan recognized instantly. Hired guns, the expensive kind. Their jackets were unbuttoned just enough to reveal the black polymer grips of pistols at their hips. Game board shifted, odds worsened. Ethan didn't let it reach his face. "You want the girl," he said. "I want the box," Voss corrected. "The girl is collateral. Unfortunately, your involvement was not part of the original arrangement. But I'm a flexible man. Hand over the cargo, and we all walk away before the weather gets truly unpleasant." Lila's fingers clenched on Ethan's sleeve. "Don't," she whispered. "Uncle Noah said—" Ethan never took his eyes off Voss. "How did you know I was here?" he asked, ignoring the question in front of them to probe the one that mattered underneath. The corporate man's smile cooled. "You made enemies in very high places when you decided to tell the truth to that committee," Voss said. "You embarrass people who don't like cameras pointed at their offshore accounts. Your little self-imposed exile might have fooled the town, but not everyone in Washington was content to let you fade away." He tilted his head, studying Ethan like a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. "When Mr. Briggs came sniffing around offshore contracts tied to the incident you so famously testified about, my employers took an interest. When your name appeared in his notes, they took a greater interest. This," he gestured to the broken rail, the dead truck, the storm, "is what we call managing risk." Lightning flared closer now. Thunder answered more urgently. "You really should give me the box, Mr. Cole," Voss added lightly. "The tide is coming in. Storm's almost here, and I'd hate for the girl to get lost in the chaos." Rex shifted his weight, muscles coiling. Rain slicked his fur down like armor. He was waiting for a single word. Ethan's mind worked like a machine. 3 hostiles. Unknown weapons. No cover worth the name between here and the house. A wounded teenager at his back. A dog who'd follow him into hell. Giving Voss the box would buy them nothing. Men like that didn't leave loose ends walking around. He made his decision. "Lila," he said quietly without taking his eyes off the 3 men, "when I move, you run. Straight to the house. Don't look back. Up the stairs, through the front door, bolt it. There's a radio on the counter. Red switch. Flip it. Call Coast Guard and say exactly this. Code Black Meridian at Bay Marais. Got it?" Her breath hitched. "How?" "Say it back," he barked, sharper. Time was a fuse burning fast. "Sea Code Black Meridian at Bay Marais," she stammered. "Coast Guard." "Good. You don't stop unless Rex stops. Understand?" Her eyes flicked to the dog, then back to Ethan. Those gray eyes were still wild with fear, but there was something else in them too. Trust. "Okay," she whispered. Voss sighed. "I really was hoping we could handle this like professionals," he said. "But if you insist—" He didn't get to finish. Ethan fired first. He didn't aim at Voss, not yet. The first 2 shots snapped toward the gravel directly in front of the hired guns, sending up a spray of rock and mud. Both men flinched sideways on instinct. "Go!" Ethan roared. Rex launched forward with a wordless snarl, a striped missile of muscle and teeth, angling toward the nearer man's legs. Lila turned and ran, knees buckling, then catching, pounding back toward the stilt house. Gunfire erupted like sudden lightning in the close air. Ethan pivoted, using the chaos he'd created as cover. One of the hired guns managed to clear his weapon. Ethan saw the muzzle swing toward the fleeing girl. He didn't think. 2 shots. Center mass. The man jerked like a puppet whose strings had been cut and went down hard. The second gunman had his pistol free and up, but he made the mistake of focusing on Ethan, not the shepherd that had veered in from his blind side. Rex hit him low, jaws clamping onto his forearm. Just as his finger tightened on the trigger, the shot went wild. The gun clattered to the road as Rex's weight dragged the man sideways, teeth sunk deep. The man shouted, a sharp, startled cry of pain. Voss dove for the open driver's door, ducking behind the SUV with the panicked speed of someone not used to being on the exposed side of violence. Ethan advanced, using short, purposeful steps, putting himself between the entangled fight, dog and struggling gunman, and the corporate man's cover. He fired once, shattering the front driver's side window just above where Voss crouched. Glass exploded inward. "Rex, out!" Ethan snapped. The shepherd released the mangled arm at once and sprang back, blood on his muzzle, eyes alive. The wounded gunman grabbed at his torn forearm, staring at the dog with a kind of stunned horror, as if he'd just discovered the ocean had teeth. "Stay down," Ethan growled at him, voice stripped of warmth. He didn't argue. The SUV's engine revved suddenly, tires spinning in the gravel. Ethan saw the flash of movement, Voss scrambling over the console into the passenger seat, slamming his hand down somewhere under the dash. "Road!" Ethan barked. Rex leaped backward as the vehicle lurched forward, fishtailing away from the broken rail to claw for purchase on the wet gravel. The SUV shot past them, side mirror missing Ethan's shoulder by inches. He raised the Glock and fired twice at the rear tires. One shot sparked off the bumper, the other hit rubber. The tire blew with a sharp report. The SUV swerved but didn't stop, engine screaming as Voss forced it back under control and gunned it down the narrow road toward town. Ethan watched it go, breathing hard, rain plastering his shirt to his skin. His heart thudded in his chest with the familiar hot, clean focus of a fight not yet finished. He looked down. Rex's flank was striped with fresh red where a bullet or shrapnel had grazed him. The dog was panting, but his eyes were bright, his stance solid. "Good boy," Ethan said quietly, hand dropping to the thick fur of Rex's neck. "You're not done yet. Neither am I." Distant sirens wailed somewhere across the marsh. The storm wind shifted, shoving humid air harder against their faces. Time was compressing. Everything Noah Briggs had set in motion was accelerating toward a breaking point. Ethan turned toward the house. Lila stood on the porch, trembling, one hand white-knuckled on the radio microphone. The other clutched the metal box to her chest. "I did it," she said as he climbed the steps, voice shaking. They answered. I gave them the code. The guy on the other end got real quiet and said, "Copy that." Then he asked who gave me that phrase. "And?" Ethan asked. "I told him my name," she said, "and that my uncle died for it." For a moment, the storm outside seemed quieter than the memory of a voice in Ethan's head. "If anything goes wrong, you take it to him. Ethan Cole. He'll remember what they did." "Inside," Ethan said. "We're not safe yet." He shut and bolted the door behind them, moved to the kitchen table, and put the metal box down between them. Rex settled under the table, leaning his weight against Ethan's leg, a solid, living anchor. The box had no lock, just a latch so stiff it took both their hands to pop it. Inside, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth, lay 3 things. A cheap thumb drive, the kind you could pick up at any gas station. A small spiral notebook with damp pages full of tight, dense handwriting. And a single photograph, edges soft from handling. Ethan picked up the photo. It was old, taken in some sun-blasted corner of a foreign country. 5 men, in dusty uniforms, stood in front of a low concrete building, arms slung over shoulders, grinning at the camera. Ethan stood on the far right, younger, less lines around the eyes, but undeniably himself. Noah Briggs, lean and smirking, was second from the left, a sniper rifle leaning against his leg like an extra limb. Between them stood a man in a local headscarf and worn jacket, his hand clasped in Ethan's. His eyes were wary, but hopeful. On the back of the photo, in ink that had bled slightly with moisture, 4 words were scrawled in Noah's cramped script. "He trusted us. Remember?" Ethan swallowed past something hard in his throat. Lila watched him with an expression that looked too old for her face. "What's on the drive?" she asked. Ethan looked at the cheap plastic rectangle. "Proof, if your uncle did what I think he did," he said. "And bait." "Bait for what?" "For the storm that's coming." He moved like a man on a mission now, the indecision of quiet months shedding from him like a skin. He grabbed his battered laptop from a shelf, booted it up on the table, and slotted the drive into a port. Folders blossomed on the screen. Invoices, shipping manifests, satellite photographs of offshore platforms and inland depots, copies of internal emails from Gulf Meridian executives talking in careful euphemisms about maximizing opportunities and risk mitigation. And nested deep within, a series of encrypted audio files. Noah had labeled them with simple dates. Ethan clicked the most recent. Static hissed, then a voice came through speakers. "It's bigger than they ever told us, Cole," Noah Briggs' voice said, rougher than Ethan remembered but unmistakable. "This isn't just about that strike. That was a test run. Meridian and their friends funneled us into that village to take out a man who was about to expose their side deals. They doctored the coordinates. Then, when it all went to hell, they pinned it on you and wiped their hands. That was the prototype. Now they're doing it here, on our own coast. Land grabs, contaminated water, shipping security operations that just happen to remove whoever gets in the way." Lila's eyes filled. "He recorded that 2 days ago," she whispered. "He told me, if we got it to you and the Coast Guard, they wouldn't be able to bury it this time. Not once people started asking questions about that phrase." "Code Black Meridian," Ethan said, understanding dawning. "It's in some old manual," Lila said. He showed me. A contingency phrase from, 20 years ago. Means potential collusion between private contractors and U.S. armed forces. They buried it, but he said the right people would remember. Ethan stared at the screen, shock giving way to a kind of cold, clean purpose he hadn't felt since before everything went wrong. He'd spent years thinking his worst sin was a mistake. Now he realized the truth was uglier and more dangerous. He hadn't made a mistake. He'd been used. Rain slammed harder against the windows. The storm had arrived in earnest, wind howling through marsh grass and under the stilted house. The sky went nearly black, turning the Gulf into a writhing slate monster. The radio on the counter crackled. "Unidentified station transmitting code Black Meridian. This is Coast Guard Sector New Orleans Command," a clipped voice said. "We read you, Bay Marais. Be advised, we are 30 minutes out with a response team. Maintain position and..." The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by dead air. Lila looked up, alarmed. "Hello?" she said into the mic. "You're breaking up." No reply. Static. Something cold slid down Ethan's spine. He checked the laptop. The connection icon that had been quietly blinking in the corner went gray. The satellite internet link had died. The storm hadn't gotten that bad yet. This was something else. He crossed to the window overlooking the road and lifted the edge of the curtain with 2 fingers. Down the rutted lane, beyond the point where the guardrail had broken, he saw headlights cutting through the rain. 2 sets. Then 3. Not the Coast Guard. Black SUVs. "Get away from the windows," he said, voice low but hard. "Now." Lila's breath hitched. "They're coming back," she whispered. "Yeah," Ethan said, "and they brought friends." Rex stood, muscles tightening, as if the storm itself were an enemy he could smell. The house rattled under a gust of wind. Thunder rolled overhead, closer now, a constant low growl. "We can't run?" Lila asked, voice thin. "There's nowhere to go." "There's somewhere," Ethan said slowly, mind racing through the map of Bay Marais he'd built over months of restless walks and sleepless nights. "Question is whether we can get there before they pin us down, or whether we make our stand here." He looked up at the ceiling, at the attic he never used, and beyond that, at the old storm siren platform that clung like a barnacle to the skeleton of the defunct water tower behind the house. Once, it had been the town's warning system for hurricanes. Now it was just a rusting relic or a nest with a high vantage point. How many men? How much ammo? How long until the storm made shooting and moving almost impossible? Once upon a time, calculations like that determined whether his team made it home. Now they might decide if a dead man's niece lived long enough to see anyone brought to justice. He turned to her. "You trust your uncle?" he asked. She stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "He died for this," she said. "Then we honor that," Ethan insisted. "We make sure this doesn't disappear in a swamp accident and a 12-second news cycle. And we do it smart. That means you and Rex get out of the kill zone while I make sure Voss and his friends stay here long enough for someone to notice the noise." Lila shook, her head, tears spilling now. "I'm not leaving you," she said. "Uncle Noah said—" "He said to find me," Ethan cut in. "He didn't say anything about you sticking around for the final chapter." He went to a cabinet and pulled out 2 items he hadn't planned to use again. A pair of night vision goggles, old but maintained, and a flare gun. He handed both to Lila. "There's a service ladder behind the house," he said. "It goes up to the base of the water tower. You climb that, take Rex, and you stay put on the platform. You'll have visibility on the road and the marsh. If you see boats coming in from the Gulf, Coast Guard or otherwise, you fire that flare. You hear gunfire, you stay on your stomach and keep your head down. Understood?" Lila's hands shook as she took the gear. "What about you?" she whispered. "I'll be the reason they don't go looking for you," he said simply. Rex whined once, a low, doubtful sound. "You go with her," Ethan told the dog, kneeling and taking his big head in both hands. He looked into dark, intelligent eyes that had seen more than most humans. "You watch her. Anybody comes up that ladder who isn't me, you put them in the hospital or the ground. Clear?" Rex's ears twitched. His gaze flicked between Ethan and Lila. Then, with a reluctant huff, he licked Ethan's knuckles once and moved to the girl's side, pressing against her leg. The bond shifted, just slightly, from soldier and handler to soldier and new charge. It hurt in a way Ethan hadn't been prepared for. The SUVs were much closer now. He could hear gravel crunching under tires. "Go," he said. "Back door. Stick to the blind side of the house. Use the ladder. Don't look at them if they call out. Don't stop for anything." Lila hesitated one heartbeat longer. "Don't die," she blurted out, voice cracking. I can't lose somebody else to them." He almost laughed. It came out as a rough exhale. "I'll do my best," he said. "Now move." She did. Rex followed, glancing back over his shoulder one last time before disappearing through the back with her. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped into the hollow stillness that came before violence. Outside, engines shut off, doors opened, voices murmured. The storm pounded the roof, masking details, but not enough. He holstered the Glock long enough to retrieve a 12-gauge shotgun from under his bed. He'd bought it for gators and drunks. Tonight it would have to do for corporate mercenaries. He moved through the house, killing the interior lights one by one, until everything inside was a dim gray mirror of the storm. Then he waited. The knock, when it came, was polite. 3 firm, measured raps on the front door. "Mr. Cole," Carter Voss called through the wood, voice smooth as ever, despite the weather. "I'm disappointed. Running is a bad look for a man who claimed to spend his life facing things head-on." Ethan stayed silent. He counted heartbeats, rain beats. "I know the girl is with you," Voss continued, "and I know you made contact with someone you shouldn't have on that radio. My employers are already handling that inconvenience. You can't call for help. You're alone out here, Mr. Cole. Just you, the girl, and the package. Don't make this more painful than it has to be." Ethan slid along the wall toward the back room, away from the line of fire he knew would come next. He didn't answer. Voss sighed, audible even through the door. "Have it your way." There was a muffled thump as something heavy hit the porch, a breaching tool of some sort. Wood groaned. The deadbolt snapped with a metallic scream. The door swung inward. The first man through got a face full of nothing but darkness and rain-weakened air. Ethan was in the second room by then, shotgun pressed to his shoulder, waiting for the moment their attention shifted. He didn't need to hit anyone with that first shot. He needed to steer them. He aimed low and left and fired into the floor near the doorway between the kitchen and the hall. Splinters erupted. The blast thundered through the stilt house, drowning the storm for an instant. "Left!" someone shouted. "He's in the back!" Perfect. Boots hammering on wet floorboards thundered toward the sound. Ethan slipped down the narrow hallway in the opposite direction, using the interior walls as cover. He'd walked this route 100 times in quiet boredom. Now, every step felt like threading a needle. He slipped out the side door, just as two armed men burst into the back bedroom where he'd been. From the yard, under the stilted structure, he could hear their voices as muted blurs. "Clear!" He went out. "Underneath," Voss called from the front. "He can't have gone far. Fan out. Remember, the priority is the drive. Bodies are regrettable, not unacceptable." Rain lashed under the house, driven by wind. Mud churned under Ethan's boots as he ducked under the low beams, moving toward the piling ladder that led up to the old water tower platform. He didn't climb it. Instead, he crouched in the shadow of the stilts and aimed outward, toward where he knew they'd fan along the house's perimeter. He saw the first merc's legs before the man saw anything. One low shot from the shotgun took his feet out from under him with a cry of pain. The man went down hard in the mud, dropping his own weapon. Return fire stitched the wet boards where Ethan's head had been a second earlier. He rolled, feeling the dull slam of a bullet hit one of the stilts nearby. "Two under the house!" a voice barked. "Watch your—" Thunder suddenly rolled so loud and close it swallowed the rest of the sentence. Except, it wasn't thunder. It was rotors, chopping the air above the storm. Ethan froze for a fraction of a second, disoriented. He hadn't heard any approach, but then again, the storm had been doing a good job of drowning everything. Light blasted through the sheets of rain, a harsh white glare that cut down from above, sweeping across the marsh and slamming against the side of his stilt house. A booming voice followed, amplified by a loudspeaker. "Armed personnel on the ground at Bay Mare Stilt Properties. This is the United States Coast Guard," the voice thundered. "Drop your weapons and lay face down. You are in violation of federal law. Comply immediately." Voss swore somewhere above, the smooth facade cracking for the first time. "No way they got here that fast," he hissed. "Take out the—" "Don't!" Ethan barked from under the house, his voice cutting across the chaotic soundscape with the sharp authority of someone who'd given life and death orders before. "You fire on federal aircraft. There's no walking away from this. Not for you, not for your bosses. You'll be the story they bury them with." For a beat, no one moved. Rain hammered. The helicopter thumped overhead. A second beam of light cut across the marsh, another chopper sweeping the canal. On the water tower platform, Lila and Rex lay flat on their stomachs, goggles pressed to her eyes, watching everything. She hadn't needed the flare. The phrase had been enough. "Ground units, you are surrounded," the loudspeaker boomed again, closer now. "I repeat, drop your weapons." Across the marsh, near the mouth of the bayou, red and blue flashes appeared where no roads ran, Coast Guard boats powering up through back channels and throwing light over walls of reeds. Voss made a choice. It was a bad one. "Take him!" he snapped, pointing toward Ethan's vague silhouette under the house. One of his men pivoted, raising a rifle. Rex exploded into motion above him. The shepherd leaped off the tower platform without hesitation. Claws scraping metal, then wood, then air. He hit the roof, scrambled, and launched again, using the slope of the tin like a ramp. He came down in a gray blur on the porch, nails tearing grooves in wet wood, then hurtled off the edge into the yard, all fury and momentum. He slammed into the rifleman before the man could complete his aim, teeth clamping onto bicep. The gun went spinning into the mud. The man screamed. The Coast Guard floodlights caught the whole thing in brutal clarity. "Dog on the field! Hold fire! Hold fire!" Someone shouted from above over the radio, their voice barely audible over rotors. Ethan rolled out further from under the house, shotgun abandoned, Glock back in his hand. The mercenary pinned by Rex reached for a sidearm with his free hand. Ethan put a bullet into the mud inches from his fingers. "Don't!" he growled. The man froze. Voss stood in the churned yard, framed by hurricane light and helicopter glare. Rain plastered his white shirt to his skin, making him look smaller, more human, and somehow more repulsive. He held no weapon. He didn't need one, and they all knew it. "Mr. Cole," he called, breath coming a little faster now. "You really think this changes anything? Even if they drag me away in cuffs, there will be lawyers. There will be hearings. And at the end of it, the people you think you're saving will still eat what we put on the shelves, drive what we fill their tanks with. We are the tide. You can't shoot the tide." Ethan stood slowly, mud dripping from his clothes, gun steady. "You're right," he said, "but you can damn well mark where it turned." Behind the corporate man, 3 Coast Guard officers in rain slickers and tactical vests came around the side of the house, weapons trained, faces grim. "On your knees!" one shouted to Voss. "Hands on your head!" For a split second, Ethan thought the man might run. Then Voss's shoulders sagged, ever so slightly. He dropped to his knees. "I'll be out before the next storm hits," he said, looking up at Ethan through the rain. "I want you to remember that, when this all calms down. They'll need another scapegoat, and you're very good at that role." Ethan met his gaze, something hard and steady in his own eyes, forged in places men like Voss only visited in sanitized briefings. "I carried that weight once," he said. "Not again, not for you." The Coast Guard officers moved in, cuffing Voss and the wounded mercs with efficient hands. More personnel poured in from the dockside, where boats had nosed against the pilings. Rex finally released his grip and backed off, muzzle stained red, chest heaving. An officer tossed a nylon lead toward Ethan. "Handle your partner, sir," the man said, a flicker of respect in his eyes. Ethan clipped the lead onto Rex's collar with hands that shook only a little. The shepherd pressed against his leg, equal parts shield and shadow, the rest of the night blurred. Statements given in a makeshift command post set up in the town's abandoned bait shop. Lila wrapped in a gray wool blanket, eyes hollow but fierce as she recounted the crash, the chase, her uncle's instructions. Digital forensics techs swarming over Ethan's battered laptop and Noah's drive, their faces going pale as file after file opened. Names, numbers, offshore accounts, contracts linking Gulf Meridian to a chain of shell companies that snaked back to the same defense contractors who'd fed Ethan's team into that kill zone overseas years ago. And in the middle of it all, like a spine of steel holding up rotten flesh, Noah Briggs's voice on, recording after recording, laying out the pattern. He'd done his homework. He'd just run out of time. Sometime near dawn, when the worst of the storm had blown past and the docks were lit with generator-powered floodlights, a woman in a soaked Coast Guard uniform stepped into the bait shop. She carried herself with the ease of command, eyes sharp despite obvious exhaustion. Silver already threaded her hair at the temples. "Mr. Cole," she said, offering a hand. "Commander Dana Rios, Sector New Orleans. We've been looking for an excuse to crack this open for a long time. Your friend Briggs just handed us a crowbar." Ethan shook her hand, silently. Rios glanced down at Rex, who was curled at his feet, head resting on one giant paw. "And this must be Rex," she added. "Our teams are already arguing over which commendation form covers saved our asses." A corner of Ethan's mouth twitched. "He works for biscuits and belly scratches," he said. "You start pinning medals on him, his head won't fit through the door." Rios's expression sobered. "There's going to be fallout," she said quietly, step closer, voice low enough that only he and Lila, dozing uneasily in a chair nearby, could hear. "Your name's going to be in the news again. Some people will try to paint you as a loose cannon. Others will want you on every morning show. I don't want any of that," he said. "Sometimes we don't get what we want," she replied. "Sometimes we get the truth instead. That strike you testified about? There's enough here to reopen investigations. Once this goes federal, and it will, there'll be nowhere for men like Voss to hide. You might finally get your record straight." He thought about that, and about the fact that Noah Briggs had died not trying to clear Ethan's name, but trying to stop the same machine from grinding up more lives here, in their own marsh. "What about her?" he asked, nodding toward Lila. Rios followed his gaze. "We have a witness protection framework," she said. "But it's complicated. She's young. She's just lost everything. The program can keep her alive. I don't know if it can help her live." Her eyes moved back to him, weighing. "Briggs trusted you," she said. "I can't order you to do anything about that. But I also can't ignore the fact that if you hadn't been here, if your dog hadn't been trained the way he is, we'd be pulling bodies out of the marsh right now, instead of evidence out of hard drives." Ethan looked at Lila, the way her hand, even in uneasy sleep, was curled around the edge of the gray Coast Guard blanket like a child clinging to a piece of driftwood in a flood. He thought of the scrawled words on the back of the photo. "He trusted us. Remember." Noah's voice on the recordings had carried something Ethan hadn't noticed the first time, Not just outrage, not just determination. Faith. Faith that someone upstream would finally say, enough. Where does she go if she doesn't go with the program? Ethan asked, voice softer. Rios hesitated. She has an aunt in Texas who said she could take her in short term, the commander said. But they don't know what they're stepping into. They think this was some kind of freak accident. They don't know she watched a man die because he knew too much, or that she rode out a gunfight on top of a water tower with night, vision on her face and a war dog at her side. Ethan looked down at Rex. The dog looked back, eyes dark and solemn. He felt the weight of their years together, the missions, the hospitals, the long nights in strange countries and longer ones in empty American apartments. He'd thought coming to Bay Marais would be a retreat, a place to wind down, to disappear. But the universe, or fate, or whatever cruel thing sat behind the curtain, had sent him a different message, in the shape of a crashing truck, a terrified girl, a metal box, and the dog who refused to let him stay on the porch. I have some space, he heard himself say. The house isn't pretty, but it's sound. There's a school bus that still limps out this way twice a day. I've got more experience keeping watch than I know what to do with. Might as well aim it somewhere useful. Rios studied him. Are you sure? She asked. No, he said honestly. But I'm more sure than I've been about anything in a long time. She nodded once. I'll have my people start the paperwork, she said. The press is going to want a narrative. Disgraced SEAL protects whistleblower's niece from corporate killers in Hurricane Town. They eat that stuff up, he grimaced. Leave my name out of it as much as you can, he said. Put Rex on the posters if you have to. Rios actually laughed, brief and bright. We'll see what we can do, she said. Get some rest, Mr. Cole. You're going to need it. He didn't, really. Sleep came in snatches over the next day as agents swarmed, boats came and went, and news vans eventually found their way down the ruined road. Through it all, Rex stayed close to both him and Lila, moving between them with the restless vigilance of someone who understood, on some level, that the fight wasn't purely physical anymore. 2 days later, when the worst of the chaos had subsided and the town had gone back to its peculiar mix of silence and sirens in the distance, Ethan found Lila sitting on the warped dock behind the house. She dangled bare feet over the water, staring at the marsh. The metal box sat beside her, empty now, except for the photo. Rex lay between them, chin on his paws, watching crabs scuttle in the shallows. You don't have to stay, Lila said, without preamble as he sat down beside her. Commander Rios told me you offered. I don't want you to feel like you're stuck with me. He huffed out a slow breath. Kid, he said, I've been stuck with ghosts a lot harsher than you for years. This feels like an upgrade. She snorted, half laugh, half sob. They're going to put those men away, right? She asked. The ones who did it to my uncle, and the people who told them to. It's not just going to be another story that disappears when the next storm hits the news. There's enough evidence that if they don't, there'll be heads rolling on camera, he said. Your uncle didn't die for a maybe. He was thorough. Too thorough for them to bury completely. Lila's fingers traced the edge of the photo, nail running along the faces. You knew him, she said, before all this, before the hearings. Yeah, Ethan said. He was a pain in the ass on long missions, sang off key, cheated at cards, bought stray kids soccer balls out of his own pocket. And when he said he had your back, that wasn't just something he wrote down. It was the truth. Her eyes shone. He always said you were the best of them, she whispered. Said you carried more than your share. He hated what they did to you. That's why he started digging. The weight he'd carried all these years didn't disappear. That's not how guilt worked. But something in it shifted, lightened, redistributed. He shouldn't have had to, Ethan said. He should have had a quiet life somewhere. Dog, kids, little house. Instead, he picked up a fight that should have been ours. Mine. You picked it up, Lila countered. He got you as far as he could. You did the rest. She nudged Rex's flank gently with her foot. And him, she added. Rex thumped his tail once, solemnly. I didn't want to move, she confessed after a moment, to some other state with people I don't know. I know it's safer, but it felt like leaving him behind, and the marsh, and everything. But Commander Rios said, I could choose. She said it'd be dangerous either way, but I'd have you and Rex and the Coast Guard looking out if I stayed. Danger's just a word, Ethan said quietly. What matters is what you do with it. She considered that. Can you teach me? She asked suddenly. To shoot? To fight? To know when people are lying like he did? He looked at her, at the hard little knot of determination that had grown around the raw wound of grief. I can teach you to see, he said. Once you see, you can unsee. That's the hard part. But yeah, I can teach you some things. She nodded. Okay, she said. Then I'll stay, for a while, with you, with Rex, until we know it's over, and maybe after. Maybe after, he echoed. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the soft slap of water against old pilings, the distant hum of a Coast Guard cutter, patrolling where no one had bothered to patrol before. Above them, the storm siren on the water tower sat rusting. But now there were fresh footprints on its ladder, a coil of rope, a stash of bottled water, and a first aid kit. It wasn't just a relic anymore. It was a lookout, a warning, a promise. Rex lifted his head and nudged Ethan's hand with his nose, then Lila's, as if stitching them together with that simple touch. Ethan scratched behind his ears, feeling the dog lean into his palm. Guess we're a unit now, he murmured. Lila smiled, the expression fragile but real. Uncle Noah used to say God doesn't send us answers, she said softly. He sends us people, and sometimes dogs. Ethan looked out over the marsh, where gray water met gray sky. For the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel like he was waiting for the next blow to land. He felt at the beginning of something. Not a mission imposed from above, not a punishment disguised as duty. A life. Messy, uncertain, shared. Come on, he said, standing, offering her a hand up. We've got work to do. That tower isn't going to reinforce itself. If this town's going to be a line in the sand, we'd better make sure it holds. She took his hand and stood, tucking the photo back into the empty box, then under her arm. Rex rose with them, shaking water from his fur, ready to move. They walked back up the worn boardwalk together, a disgraced veteran, a grieving girl, and a battle-scarred dog, toward a house that had once been a hiding place and was slowly, storm by storm, becoming something else. A watchpost, a home, a line, and somewhere far from Bay Marais, in a quiet room with no windows, men who'd thought they were untouchable were discovering that a single dog dragging a broken soldier back into the fight could change much more than one life. It could turn a tide.